The encounter that changed everything. The sun rose over the small city of Willow Creek, casting warm golden rays on streets that were just beginning to wake. Jamal Simmons adjusted his rearview mirror in his beat-up 1995 Honda Accord, its once red paint now faded to a dull rust. The car groaned in protest as he navigated the bumpy roads on his way to the grocery store, where he worked part-time. The morning was still, except for the occasional chirp of birds and the faint hum of distant traffic. Jamal glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 6:45 a.m. He had 15 minutes to clock in and couldn't afford to be late again. His manager, Mr. Whitaker, wasn't known for his patience. Jamal tightened his grip on the wheel, his mind preoccupied with the day ahead. Another grueling 8-hour shift, followed by tutoring his younger brother, Marcus, who had a science test coming up. Then there was his mother, who needed help with her medication schedule. At 17, Jamal carried responsibilities far beyond his years, but he never complained. His family depended on him, and he was determined to be their rock. As Jamal turned onto Orchard Lane, something caught his eye. A black luxury sedan sitting awkwardly at the edge of the road. Its front end was crumpled against a tree, smoke rising from the hood. His heart skipped a beat. At first, he thought it was abandoned, but then he noticed movement. A man lay sprawled on the ground a few feet from the wreck, his suit rumpled and stained with blood. Jamal slowed his car to a stop, his pulse quickening. He hesitated, glancing at his phone. He could call 911 and wait, but something in the man's faint, desperate gestures urged him to act. Jamal threw the car into park and jumped out, his sneakers crunching against the gravel. "Sir, are you okay?" Jamal asked, crouching beside the man. Up close, he could see the man was in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a sharp face now contorted in pain. A gash on his temple trickled blood, and his leg was bent at an unnatural angle. The man groaned, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hospital, please." Jamal swallowed hard, his mind racing. He wasn't a paramedic, and the situation was far beyond anything he'd dealt with before. But leaving the man here wasn't an option. Jamal quickly assessed the situation. The luxury sedan was a wreck and wouldn't be moving anytime soon. His own car wasn't much better, but it would have to do. "Okay, hang in there. I'm going to get you to the hospital," Jamal said, trying to keep his voice steady. Carefully, he hooked his arms under the man's shoulders, wincing as the man let out a cry of pain. The man was heavier than he looked, and maneuvering him into the passenger seat of Jamal's car was a grueling process. By the time he managed to buckle the man in, sweat dripped from his forehead, and his arms ached. Sliding into the driver's seat, Jamal started the engine. The car sputtered for a moment before roaring to life. "Come on, don't quit on me now," he muttered, easing onto the road. The ride to the hospital felt like an eternity. Jamal kept glancing at the man, whose breathing was shallow but steady. "You're gonna be okay, sir," Jamal said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure the man or himself. When the hospital finally came into view, relief washed over Jamal. He pulled up to the emergency entrance and threw the car into park, jumping out to flag down help. "I've got an injured man here," he shouted, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of the morning. A team of nurses rushed out with a stretcher, their practiced efficiency taking over as they carefully moved the man from Jamal's car. One of the nurses turned to Jamal, her expression serious but kind. "What happened?" "I found him like that," Jamal explained, his voice shaky from adrenaline. "His car's wrecked back on Orchard Lane. He was unconscious when I got to him." The nurse nodded, her focus shifting back to the patient. "You did good. We'll take it from here." Jamal stepped back, watching as they wheeled the man through the automatic doors and out of sight. A strange mix of relief and uncertainty settled over him. He'd done what he could, but questions lingered. Who was the man? Would he be okay? And what about Jamal's job? Glancing at his phone, he saw the time. 7:20 a.m. His shift had started 20 minutes ago. Jamal climbed back into his car, gripping the steering wheel as he replayed the events in his mind. His father's voice echoed from years past. "You help people when they need it, son. No excuses." With a deep breath, he started the car and headed to the grocery store, bracing for the confrontation that awaited him. When he arrived, the parking lot was already bustling with early morning shoppers. Jamal slipped through the employee entrance, his heart pounding. As he clocked in, Mr. Whittaker's voice boomed from behind him. "Simmons, you're late again." Jamal turned, already forming an explanation, but Whittaker held up a hand. "I don't want to hear it. We've been over this." "Mr. Whittaker, I swear, it wasn't my fault," Jamal began, his voice earnest. "There was an accident. A man was hurt bad. I had to get him to the hospital." Whittaker raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over his face. "An accident? That's the best excuse you've got." "It's not an excuse," Jamal said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I saved a man's life. He could have died out there." Whittaker crossed his arms, his expression hard. "And I'm supposed to believe that? Look, Simmons, I've given you plenty of chances, but this is the last straw. You're fired." The words hit Jamal like a punch to the gut. "Fired? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Whittaker said, his tone final. "Clean out your locker." Jamal stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling within him. Without another word, he turned and walked away. As he emptied his locker, his mind raced. What now? How was he going to explain this to his mom? The thought of her disappointment made his chest tighten. As Jamal drove home, the weight of the morning's events pressed down on him. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? So why did it feel like the universe was punishing him for it? A ripple of consequences. Jamal sat slouched in his rusting Honda Accord, parked in the driveway of his family's modest home. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, but the sound barely registered over the storm brewing in his mind. He stared at the peeling paint on the front door, a symbol of everything his family had endured. His stomach twisted. How was he going to tell his mother that he'd lost his job? Gathering his courage, Jamal pushed open the door and stepped out. His sneakers crunched on the gravel path as he approached the house. He paused at the threshold, taking a deep breath before pushing the door open. The creak of the old hinges seemed louder than usual, as if announcing his presence with a warning. "Jamal." His mother's voice called from the kitchen, weary but warm. He stepped inside, the familiar smells of their home wrapping around him, a mix of lavender cleaner and the faint musk of old wood. His younger siblings, Marcus and Tia, were seated on the worn living room carpet, sorting through a box of puzzles. Marcus, 12 years old but already sprouting the beginnings of a lanky frame, looked up with a grin. "Hey, Jamal, you're home early. Did they let you off work?" "Yeah," Jamal muttered, his throat tightening. "Something like that." Marcus and Tia didn't pick up on the strained tone. Tia, with her gap-toothed smile, held up a puzzle piece. "Look, Jamal, we found the last piece. It's going to fit right here," she said, proudly pointing to the corner of the puzzle. "That's great, Tia," Jamal replied, forcing a smile. "Keep at it." Their mom, Angela, emerged from the kitchen, her frail frame moving carefully. She had aged prematurely, her chronic illness draining her vitality. Her sharp eyes immediately locked onto Jamal's slumped shoulders and downcast expression. "What happened?" she asked, wiping her hands on a faded dish towel. Jamal hesitated, avoiding her gaze. "Mom, can we talk for a minute? In private?" Angela frowned but nodded, gesturing toward the kitchen. She led the way, her cane clicking softly against the worn linoleum floor. Jamal followed, closing the door behind them. The sound of his siblings' cheerful chatter faded, replaced by the steady hum of the refrigerator. Angela lowered herself into a chair, her brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, Jamal? You're scaring me." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms tightly over his chest. "Mom, I got fired today." Her expression shifted, a mix of shock and disbelief. Fired? What? Why? Jamal sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was late. Again. But Mom, it wasn't just because I overslept or anything like that. There was this guy, a man in a car accident. His car was in a ditch, and he was hurt bad. I stopped to help him and drove him to the hospital. That's why I was late. Angela's lips parted, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then her brow softened, and she reached for his hand. You did the right thing, Jamal. You saved someone's life. Yeah, but it cost me my job, Jamal muttered, his frustration bubbling to the surface. How are we going to make it now, Mom? The bills, groceries, your medication. I don't even know how we're going to get through the next month. Angela squeezed his hand gently. We've been through worse, baby. And we'll get through this too. You did what you had to do. I'm proud of you. Jamal's throat tightened at her words. He wanted to believe her, but the weight of responsibility felt crushing. He was supposed to be the one holding everything together, and now it felt like he'd let everyone down. The next morning, Jamal woke to the sound of knocking at the front door. He groaned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. It was early, too early for visitors. He pulled on a shirt and shuffled to the door, his heart sinking when he saw who was outside. A police cruiser idled at the curb, its blue and white paint gleaming in the morning sun. Two officers stood on the porch, their expressions neutral but firm. Are you Jamal Simmons? One of them asked. Jamal froze, his stomach flipping. Yeah, that's me. What's this about? Were you involved in an incident last week involving a car accident? The officer asked, pulling out a notepad. Jamal's mind raced. He hadn't done anything wrong, had he? Yeah. I helped a guy who was in a wreck. I drove him to the hospital. The officer nodded, jotting something down. We've been trying to locate you. The man you helped has been asking about you. Wait, he's okay? Jamal asked, relief flooding his voice. Yes, he's recovering, the officer replied. His name is Anthony Crawford. He's a local businessman. He wanted to thank you personally. Jamal blinked, caught off guard. He doesn't need to do that. I was just helping. Well, he seems pretty determined, the officer said with a small smile. He and his wife would like to meet you. Would you be open to that? Jamal hesitated. Meeting a wealthy businessman and his family felt intimidating, especially with everything going on. But a part of him was curious. What did they want? And why were they going to such lengths to find him? Sure, I guess, Jamal said finally. When? They're waiting outside now, the officer said, gesturing toward a sleek black SUV parked behind the cruiser. Jamal's eyes widened. He hadn't even noticed it. The vehicle looked out of place in his rundown neighborhood, its polished exterior gleaming in stark contrast to the peeling paint and cracked sidewalks. He stepped out onto the porch, squinting against the sunlight. The SUV's doors opened, and a man stepped out, leaning slightly on a cane. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and his suit, despite the cane, exuded authority and poise. Beside him was a woman with a warm smile, her elegant attire hinting at wealth but not arrogance. You must be Jamal, the man said, his voice steady but tinged with gratitude. I'm Anthony Crawford. This is my wife, Evelyn. Jamal nodded, unsure of what to say. Hi. I'm glad to see you're okay. Anthony smiled faintly. Thanks to you. I don't know if I'd be here today if you hadn't stopped to help. Evelyn stepped forward, her smile widening. We've been looking for you all week, Jamal. You didn't just save Anthony's life. You saved our family. Jamal shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. I just did what anyone would have done. Anthony's expression grew serious. No, Jamal. Most people wouldn't have. They would've kept driving. What you did was extraordinary. Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, holding it out to Jamal. This is for you and your family. A token of our gratitude. Jamal stared at the envelope, his heart pounding. He hesitated before taking it, his fingers brushing the crisp paper. "What is this?" "Open it," Evelyn said gently. Jamal did, his hands trembling. Inside was a check, a staggering amount that made his breath catch. I can't take this," he stammered, his voice cracking. "This is too much." Anthony shook his head. "It's not enough. You gave us a gift we can never repay. Let us help you." Tears pricked Jamal's eyes as he looked back at the Crawfords. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. A ray of hope. Jamal sat at the worn kitchen table, staring at the check in his hands as if it might vanish into thin air. His mother, Angela, sat across from him, her frail hands folded together, trembling slightly. Marcus and Tia had been ushered outside to play, their laughter filtering faintly through the thin walls. The house, usually buzzing with the noise of day-to-day survival, had fallen into an uncharacteristic silence. "Jamal," Angela said softly, her voice heavy with emotion. This could change everything." Jamal looked up, his expression a mix of disbelief and hesitation. "Mom, it feels wrong somehow, like I didn't do it for money. I just helped the guy because he needed it." Angela reached out and covered Jamal's hand with her own. "I know you didn't, baby. But sometimes when you do good, good comes back to you. Don't let guilt rob you of what's being offered." Jamal nodded slowly, his mind racing. The amount on the check was staggering, enough to cover his mother's mounting medical bills, pay off their back rent, and still leave a cushion for emergencies. It was the kind of money that could pull their family out of the cycle of struggle they'd been trapped in for years. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Angela raised an eyebrow. "Expecting someone?" "No," Jamal said, pushing back his chair. He walked to the door and opened it cautiously. Standing there were Anthony and Evelyn Crawford, dressed casually but exuding the same air of grace and purpose as before. "We hope we're not intruding," Evelyn said with a warm smile. "We just wanted to follow up and see how you and your family are doing." No, you're not intruding," Jamal said, stepping aside to let them in. "Come in." The Crawfords entered, their eyes scanning the modest living room. Anthony's expression grew somber as he took in the cracked walls and threadbare furniture. Evelyn's gaze softened as it landed on Angela, who had risen from her seat with some difficulty. "Mrs. Simmons," Evelyn said, crossing the room to shake her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Your son has told us so much about you." Angela's smile was faint but genuine. "Please, call me Angela. And thank you. Thank you for what you've done for Jamal. He told me about the check. I can't even begin to express how much this means to us." Anthony shook his head. "The check is just the beginning. Jamal's actions reminded us of something important, that the world still has good people in it. We want to do more." Angela blinked, her brow furrowing. "More? You've already done so much." Anthony glanced at Evelyn, who nodded in encouragement. He turned back to Angela. "We'd like to cover your medical expenses, not just the bills you already have, but any treatments or care you need moving forward." Angela's hand flew to her chest, her breath hitching. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Evelyn said gently. "We're in a position to help, and we want to. Your son saved my husband's life. This is the least we can do." Tears welled in Angela's eyes as she sank back into her chair. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've been praying for a miracle, and I think this is it." Jamal stood silently, his throat tight. He had spent so long trying to hold everything together, to carry the weight of his family's struggles, that the idea of someone else stepping in felt almost unreal. The next week passed in a blur. True to their word, the Crawfords arranged for Angela to see a top cardiologist in the city. For the first time in years, she received a comprehensive evaluation and a treatment plan that gave her a real chance at recovery. Watching her smile after meeting with the doctor was like seeing a weight lifted from her soul. Jamal, meanwhile, found himself grappling with the changes happening around him. The Crawfords had made it clear they wanted to help beyond just money and medical care. One afternoon, Anthony invited Jamal to join him for lunch at an upscale cafe downtown. Jamal felt out of place as they walked in, his jeans and hoodie a stark contrast to the tailored suits and polished shoes of the other patrons. But Anthony didn't seem to notice, leading him to a quiet table by the window. "Jamal," Anthony began as they sat down, "I want to talk to you about your future." Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what are your goals? What do you want to do with your life?" Jamal hesitated. It was a question he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been so focused on just surviving, taking care of my family." Anthony nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable. But now that things are starting to stabilize, it's time to think about what you want. Have you thought about going back to school?" Jamal's stomach twisted. He had dropped out of high school during his junior year to work full-time and support his family. Going back felt like an impossible dream. "I don't know if that's an option," he said quietly. "I've been out too long." "Nonsense," Anthony said, leaning forward. "You're smart, resourceful, and determined. Qualities that can take you far. If you're willing, Evelyn and I want to help you get your GED and maybe even look into college." Jamal's eyes widened. "College? I don't know. That feels out of reach." "Nothing is out of reach," Anthony said firmly. "Not for someone like you. You've already proven that you can overcome anything." Jamal looked out the window, his thoughts swirling. Part of him wanted to believe Anthony, to imagine a future where he wasn't just surviving but thriving. But another part of him was afraid to hope, afraid to fail. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Anthony smiled. "That's all I ask." That evening, Jamal returned home to find Evelyn sitting with his mother, helping her sort through medical documents. Taya was in the corner, coloring happily, while Marcus worked on his homework at the kitchen table. The house felt lighter, as if the tension that had weighed them down for years was finally lifting. Jamal sat down beside his mother, who looked up with a tired but contented smile. "How was lunch?" she asked. "It was good," Jamal said, glancing at Marcus. "How's your science test coming along, little man?" "Better," Marcus said with a grin. "Mr. Crawford said he'd help me build a model rocket if I ace it." Jamal chuckled. "Well, now you've got some real motivation." As the evening wore on, Jamal found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. Maybe things really could get better. Maybe, just maybe, he and his family could finally start dreaming again. The turning point. The morning sun cast warm rays over the Simmons' new house, a modest but solid home in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the crumbling walls and leaking roof of their old one. Jamal stretched as he stepped onto the porch, feeling the crispness of the air fill his lungs. It still felt surreal to live in a place where everything worked, where the walls were smooth, the windows weren't cracked, and the roof didn't threaten to collapse every time it rained. The sound of laughter caught his attention. In the front yard, Marcus and Tia were playing tag, their joy infectious. For the first time in a long while, Jamal felt a sense of peace he couldn't quite describe. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing his family wasn't on the brink of falling apart anymore. Angela stepped onto the porch, leaning on her cane. Her color had improved since starting her new treatments, and she moved with a steadiness that had been absent for years. "You're up early," she said, her voice lighter than usual. Jamal shrugged, offering a small smile. "Couldn't sleep much. Just thinking." Angela nodded knowingly. "Thinking's good, as long as it doesn't weigh you down too much." Before Jamal could reply, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. He immediately recognized it as Anthony Crawford's. The Crawfords had been a near-constant presence in their lives since the accident, offering not only financial support, but also a genuine friendship that Jamal hadn't expected. Anthony stepped out of the car, his usual composed demeanor paired with a warm smile. Evelyn followed, carrying a folder in one hand. "Morning, Jamal," Anthony greeted as he approached the porch. "Angela." "Morning," Jamal replied, shaking Anthony's hand. "What brings you by so early?" "We've got something to discuss," Anthony said, his tone carrying an edge of excitement. "Mind if we come in?" "Of course," Angela said, stepping aside. Come in, come in." Inside, the Crawfords settled at the dining table, where Evelyn laid the folder down. Jamal joined them, his curiosity piqued. "What's this about?" he asked. Evelyn opened the folder, revealing a stack of papers. "Jamal, you've been given a rare opportunity," she began. "Anthony and I have been talking, and we believe you have incredible potential. We want to help you tap into it." Jamal frowned slightly, unsure of where this was going. "What do you mean?" Anthony leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You've demonstrated leadership, resilience, and a drive to help others. Those qualities are rare, Jamal. We want to invest in your future, not just for you, but for your family." Jamal's stomach flipped. "Invest? How?" Evelyn slid a paper across the table toward him. "This is a full scholarship to one of the best technical training programs in the state. It's a 6-month course that teaches skills in engineering, mechanics, and renewable energy systems. It's a chance to build a career, something stable and fulfilling." Jamal stared at the paper, the words blurring slightly as he processed the offer. "A technical program. But I didn't even finish high school." "You don't need to," Anthony said firmly. "The program has an open-door policy for people with the right drive and aptitude. And trust me, Jamal, you have both." Jamal leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He thought about the long hours he'd spent working dead-end jobs, the constant struggle to make ends meet. A technical program could open doors he'd never even considered. But doubts crept in as well. "What if I fail?" he asked quietly. Anthony's gaze didn't waver. "You won't. And even if you stumble, Evelyn and I will be here to support you. This is about giving you the tools to succeed, Jamal. You've already proven you can rise to any challenge." Angela reached over and placed a hand on Jamal's arm. "Baby, you've spent so much time taking care of us. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself too." Jamal looked at her, his heart aching with the weight of her words. He had spent years putting his family first, often at the expense of his own dreams. Could he really take this step for himself? That evening, Jamal sat on the edge of his bed, the scholarship papers spread out in front of him. The Crawfords had left after a few hours of discussion, leaving Jamal with plenty to think about. He glanced at a framed photo on his nightstand, a picture of his father, smiling broadly with his arm around a younger Jamal. The memory of his father's voice echoed in his mind. "Never be afraid to bet on yourself, son. You're capable of more than you know." He exhaled deeply, feeling the tension in his chest begin to ease. Maybe it was time to take a chance. The next morning, Jamal called the Crawfords and told them he was in. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. The technical program started in just a month, and Jamal threw himself into getting ready. He spent hours brushing up on math and science, often with Marcus by his side. The young boy was fascinated by the idea of his older brother studying engineering, and Jamal found himself inspired by Marcus's enthusiasm. On the first day of the program, Anthony drove Jamal to the training center. The building was sleek and modern, a far cry from the aging schools Jamal had attended. Inside, he was greeted by a group of diverse students, all eager to learn. Jamal felt a flicker of nervousness as he took his seat, but it quickly faded as the instructor began to speak. The course was intense, covering everything from basic mechanics to advanced renewable energy systems. But Jamal thrived under the challenge, his natural problem-solving skills and work ethic setting him apart. Back at home, Angela's health continued to improve under her new treatment plan. She began taking short walks in the neighborhood, her strength slowly returning. Marcus and Tia adapted to their new school with ease, and the family began to find a rhythm of stability and hope. One evening, Jamal returned home from class to find Marcus sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and diagrams. "What's all this?" Jamal asked, dropping his bag by the door. Marcus grinned. "I'm building a model rocket. Mr. Crawford said he'd help if I passed my science test. And I did. So now we're making it together." Jamal ruffled his brother's hair, his chest swelling with pride. "That's awesome, little man. Can't wait to see it fly." Months passed, and Jamal completed the program with flying colors. At the graduation ceremony, he stood before his family and the Crawfords, holding his certificate with a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in years. The program director approached him afterward with a job offer, a position at a leading engineering firm that specialized in renewable energy projects. Jamal accepted the offer with gratitude, knowing that this was only the beginning. As he drove home that evening, he glanced in the rearview mirror at Marcus and Tia, who were chattering excitedly about his new job. Angela sat in the front seat, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You did it, Jamal," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given us a future." Jamal smiled, his heart full. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly living, not just surviving. The journey hadn't been easy, but every step had been worth it. As he pulled into the driveway of their home, the warm light spilling from the windows, Jamal knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. Building a legacy. The hum of the engine softened as Jamal's car rolled into the driveway of their house. The golden glow of the evening sun bathed the neighborhood in warmth, reflecting off the polished exterior of Jamal's newer, more reliable sit-in. It had taken months of saving from his new engineering job to afford the car, but every time he drove it, it served as a reminder of how far he'd come. Inside the house, the scent of baked goods wafted through the air. Angela was standing at the counter, a rare smile lighting up her face as she arranged freshly baked cookies on a tray. Her movements were steadier, her breathing easier, a testament to the success of her medical treatments. Marcus and Tia darted around the kitchen, eagerly trying to sneak cookies before dinner. Jamal stepped through the front door, his work bag slung over his shoulder. "Something smells good," he said, grinning as he set his bag down by the couch. "Mom's baking," Marcus shouted, holding a cookie triumphantly in the air before Angela could shoo him away. "And they're amazing." Jamal laughed. "Don't eat them all, little man. Leave some for the rest of us." Angela turned to her eldest son, her eyes sparkling. "You're home early. Busy day at work." "Busy, but good," Jamal replied, leaning against the counter. "We wrapped up the first phase of the solar farm project today. It's incredible seeing it all come together." Angela beamed with pride. "You've worked so hard for this, Jamal. Your dad would be so proud of you." Jamal's chest tightened at the mention of his father, but it was a bittersweet feeling. His father's lessons and sacrifices had shaped him, and Jamal carried those values into everything he did. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly. "That means a lot." Later that evening, after the kids were in bed, Jamal sat in the living room with Angela. The house was quiet, the only sound coming from the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Angela sipped her tea, her gaze thoughtful. "You've done so much for us, Jamal," she said after a long pause. "But I can see that you're meant for more." Jamal frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Angela set her mug down on the coffee table. "You've built a stable life for yourself, but you're not the kind of person to stop there. You have the ability to make a difference, not just for our family, but for others too." Jamal considered her words, his mind racing. He had spent so much time focused on lifting his family out of hardship that he hadn't thought much about what came next. Could he really expand his reach beyond their home? Angela continued, her voice firm, but gentle. "You've always had a big heart, Jamal. You saw a man in need on the side of the road and didn't hesitate to help. That same compassion can inspire others." Maybe it's time to think about how you can use your success to give back. The idea stuck with Jamal over the following weeks. Between his long hours at the engineering firm and his time with family, he began brainstorming ways to pay it forward. One night, he sat down with Anthony Crawford over coffee to share his thoughts. "I want to give back," Jamal said, his hands wrapped around his mug. "But I'm not sure where to start. There are so many people out there struggling, like we were. I just want to make a difference." Anthony nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's admirable, Jamal. And I think you're in a unique position to do just that. Have you thought about starting a mentorship program? Something to help young people from underprivileged backgrounds learn skills and find opportunities." Jamal's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. A mentorship program could be huge, especially for kids in neighborhoods like mine. They need to see what's possible." "Exactly," Anthony said, smiling. "And you'd be the perfect person to lead it. You've lived it, Jamal. You know what it takes to rise above challenges." Over the next several months, Jamal poured his energy into creating a mentorship program called Bridge the Gap. The program aimed to connect underprivileged youth with professionals in fields like engineering, technology, and business. Jamal worked tirelessly, reaching out to local schools, community centers, and businesses to build partnerships. The first mentorship session was held at a local community center. Jamal stood at the front of the room, facing a group of about 20 teenagers. Some looked skeptical, others curious, but all of them were there because they wanted something more. "Welcome to Bridge the Gap," Jamal began, his voice steady. "I started this program because I've been where you are. I faced struggles, doubted myself, and wondered if I'd ever get out of the cycle of survival. But I'm here to tell you that it's possible, and I want to help you get there." Over the course of the session, Jamal shared his story, from growing up in poverty to saving Anthony Crawford's life, to the opportunities that followed. The room was silent as he spoke, the teens hanging on to his every word. Afterward, several students approached him, their eyes bright with hope. One girl, about 15, said, "Hearing your story makes me believe I can do something too. I want to be an engineer one day." "You can," Jamal said, smiling, "and I'll be here to help you every step of the way." As Bridge the Gap grew, so did Jamal's influence in the community. He partnered with local businesses to offer internships, organized workshops on everything from financial literacy to resume building, and even brought in guest speakers from various industries. The program became a beacon of hope for countless families, providing a path out of poverty and into possibility. Angela watched with pride as her son transformed not only their lives, but the lives of so many others. One evening, as they sat on the porch together, she reached over and squeezed his hand. "You've built something incredible, Jamal," she said. "Your dad would be so proud." Jamal looked out at the stars, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "I just want to make sure no one else has to struggle like we did," he said. "If I can do that, then it's all worth it." And for the first time in years, Jamal felt like he wasn't just living a life of survival. He was building a legacy. A legacy cemented. The grand hall of the Willow Creek Community Center was alive with chatter and excitement. Rows of chairs filled with students, parents, local leaders, and sponsors lined the polished wooden floor. A large banner hung above the stage, proudly displaying the words, "Bridge the Gap, 5th Annual Graduation Ceremony." Jamal stood backstage, adjusting his tie and taking deep breaths to steady his nerves. He peeked through the curtain at the crowd, scanning the sea of faces. Among them were his mother, Angela, beaming with pride, and his siblings, Marcus and Tia, now older but just as supportive as ever. Next to them sat Anthony and Evelyn Crawford, who had been instrumental in helping him get Bridge the Gap off the ground. "Ready?" asked Sarah, one of Jamal's program coordinators, standing beside him with a clipboard. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jamal replied, smiling. He still wasn't used to being the center of attention, but today wasn't about him. It was about the 50 students who had worked tirelessly to complete the program and were now poised to embark on brighter futures. Sarah gave him a thumbs up and stepped out onto the stage. The crowd quieted as she approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and confident, "thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the incredible achievements of our Bridge the Gap graduates. None of this would be possible without the vision and dedication of one man. Please welcome our founder and director, Jamal Simmons." Applause erupted as Jamal stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding. He approached the microphone, his gaze sweeping across the audience. The energy in the room was electric, and he could feel the hope and pride radiating from every corner. "Thank you," Jamal began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I started Bridge the Gap, I had one goal: to create opportunities for young people who felt like the odds were stacked against them. I know what that feels like because I've been there. I sat in those chairs, wondering if I'd ever be able to rise above my circumstances." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I'm standing here today as proof that with the right support, determination, and a little bit of luck, anything is possible. And now, each of you, our graduates, are proof of that too." The crowd applauded, and Jamal took a moment to collect himself before continuing. "This program isn't just about academics or career skills. It's about building confidence, resilience, and a belief in your ability to shape your own future. I couldn't be prouder of each and every one of you." He turned to the graduates, who sat in the front rows wearing caps and gowns. "You've worked hard to get here, and this is just the beginning. Remember that your potential is limitless. Use what you've learned here to make a difference, not just for yourselves, but for others." The applause swelled as Jamal stepped back, his chest swelling with pride. The ceremony continued with speeches from students and mentors, each one sharing stories of growth, perseverance, and triumph. One by one, the graduates were called to the stage to receive their certificates, their smiles lighting up the room. After the ceremony, the hall buzzed with celebration. Families posed for pictures, laughter echoed, and tears of joy flowed freely. Jamal moved through the crowd, shaking hands, offering hugs, and soaking in the atmosphere. Angela approached him, her cane now more of a prop than a necessity. She pulled him into a tight hug, her voice thick with emotion. "You've done something incredible, Jamal. Look around you. This is your legacy." Jamal smiled, holding her close. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You're the reason I kept going." Anthony Crawford joined them, his hand resting on Jamal's shoulder. "You've exceeded every expectation, Jamal. This program has changed lives, including mine. I'll never forget the day you stopped to help me." Jamal chuckled. "Neither will I. That day flipped my whole world upside down." "And look at where it's brought you," Anthony said, his voice filled with pride. "But I have a feeling this is just the beginning." As the crowd began to thin, Jamal found himself standing near the stage, watching Marcus and Tia help pack up the decorations. Marcus, now a high school junior with ambitions of becoming an aerospace engineer, approached with a broad grin. "Hey, Jamal," Marcus said, holding up his phone. "One of the graduates just posted on social media, and the video's already going viral. People are talking about Bridge the Gap all over the place." Jamal shook his head, smiling. "That's amazing, but it's not about going viral, Marcus. It's about the work we do." Marcus rolled his eyes playfully. Yeah, but come on, it's pretty cool." Jamal laughed. "Okay, it's cool. But let's not lose sight of the mission." In the weeks following the ceremony, the attention on Bridge the Gap grew. Local news outlets covered the program, highlighting its impact on the community. Donations poured in, allowing Jamal to expand the program to neighboring towns. Soon, companies began reaching out, offering internships and scholarships for graduates. One evening, Jamal sat in his office, reviewing plans for the program's expansion. His phone buzzed with a call from Evelyn Crawford. "Jamal," she began, her voice brimming with excitement, "I have news. The State Education Board is interested in partnering with Bridge the Gap to implement similar programs statewide. They want to meet with you. Jamal leaned back in his chair, his heart racing. Statewide. That's incredible. It is, Evelyn said. And it's all because of you. Months later, Jamal found himself standing in front of a much larger audience at a state education conference. He shared the story of Bridge the Gap, emphasizing the importance of mentorship, community support, and opportunities for underprivileged youth. The room erupted in applause when he finished, and dozens of educators and leaders approached him, eager to collaborate. As Jamal walked off the stage, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He thought back to that fateful day on the side of the road, when he had stopped to help a stranger in need. That single act of kindness had set off a chain of events that changed his life, and the lives of so many others. Back at home that evening, Jamal sat on the porch with Angela, watching the stars. "It's funny," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Everything started with a decision I almost didn't make." Angela smiled, her gaze fixed on the sky. "But you did make it, Jamal, and that's what matters. You followed your heart, and look at all the good that's come from it." Jamal nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. He had come so far, but he knew the journey wasn't over. There were still more bridges to build, more gaps to close, and more lives to touch. As the stars twinkled above, Jamal made a silent promise: to keep building, to keep giving, and to keep believing in the power of kindness and resilience, because in the end, those were the things that truly changed the world. A new horizon. Jamal's porch was quiet as he sat beside his mother, the cool evening air wrapping around them like a soft embrace. The hum of the day's events still buzzed faintly in his ears: handshakes, applause, and the endless chorus of congratulations. The overwhelming success of the Bridge the Gap program had begun to feel like a movement, but Jamal's heart remained grounded. Angela broke the silence, her voice soft. "You know, Jamal, I was afraid for a long time that life wouldn't give you the opportunities you deserved. I used to pray every night, asking for a way to lighten your load." She paused, looking out at the stars. "Now, watching you, I realize you weren't just given away. You created it." Jamal reached over, taking her hand in his. "I couldn't have done any of it without you, Mom. You taught me to care, to help, to keep going no matter how hard it got. That's what kept me moving." Angela smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm proud of you, Jamal. Your father would be too." Over the next year, Bridge the Gap flourished beyond anything Jamal had imagined. The program expanded into multiple cities, with hundreds of students enrolling each year. Partnerships with state leaders and corporations led to scholarships, internships, and full-time job placements for graduates. Jamal found himself traveling more often, speaking at schools, conferences, and even a national leadership summit. His story resonated with people from all walks of life, not just because of his success, but because of his unwavering belief in the power of kindness and perseverance. But no matter how far he traveled, Jamal always returned home to Willow Creek. It remained his anchor, the place where it all began. He continued to mentor students personally, often holding sessions in the same community center where the first class of Bridge the Gap had graduated. One crisp autumn morning, Jamal stood on a small stage at the grand opening of a new Bridge the Gap headquarters. The state-of-the-art facility was equipped with classrooms, workshops, and even a robotics lab. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a crowd of supporters, including the Crawfords, local leaders, and dozens of graduates who had come to celebrate. As the applause died down, Jamal stepped forward, a microphone in hand. He looked out at the faces of students, families, and mentors, his chest swelling with gratitude. "This building," he began, his voice steady, is more than just bricks and mortar. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we believe in each other. When I was a teenager, struggling to make ends meet, I never imagined I'd stand here today. But I've learned that no matter how hard things get, There's always a way forward, if we're willing to take that first step. He paused, scanning the crowd. This isn't just my story. It's yours. It's proof that one act of kindness, one decision to help, can create ripples that change lives. And I hope the students who walk through these doors will carry that message with them wherever they go. The crowd erupted into cheers as Jamal stepped back, his heart pounding with pride. He knew the work was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever came next. That evening, back at home, Jamal sat with Marcus and Tia in the living room. Marcus was showing off a prototype for a solar-powered drone he was building, his passion for engineering shining through in every word. Tia, now in middle school, chimed in with her own ideas, her creativity boundless. Angela watched from her favorite chair, a contented smile on her face. "Look at you two," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Dreaming big, just like your brother." Marcus grinned. "We've got the best role model." Jamal chuckled, leaning back on the couch. "I don't know about all that. But I do know that no matter what you do, you've got to believe in yourself. That's where it all starts." As the night wore on, Jamal found himself on the porch again, the stars twinkling above. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the struggles, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt. Every step had been worth it. His phone buzzed with a message from Anthony Crawford. "Proud of you, Jamal. Keep shining." Jamal smiled, setting the phone down. The future felt bright, not just for him, but for everyone whose lives had intersected with his. He had built something lasting, something meaningful, a legacy that would continue long after him. Taking a deep breath, Jamal closed his eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over him. The world was vast, full of challenges and possibilities. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel small or afraid. He felt ready. And he knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The best was yet to come.